Sharon, thanks for making it. Susan B. and PAF, PA Farm Girl. Okay. Batman's here as well. Good to see you as well. So this is a bit of a different episode. You guys know that I normally sort of frame everything, and I try and give the put the narrative around the framing and around the title. So this time I want to put the ball in your court. I'm going to be honest and say that I would prefer something that's quoting from something he's saying. Not necessarily, but I'm definitely, what's the word? I lean in that way. I can't quite think of it's something it's just a P word. I just can't quite think of it now. But yeah, so if you think of a good summary for the episode and it's quite catchy, that can also work. But I definitely am more, just can't think of the word. What is the word for when you are, it's not particular. I'm more, sorry, I just can't think of it. Yeah, so that's what we're going to do. There's also a little bit of a surprise in store for the 19th episode. Can you believe it? We're almost at 20 episodes. So, yeah. Nisi, good to see you here. True Jedi Forever. I know Bridget, I think it's Bowman. Bridget has been trying all sorts of titles already. So good luck with that. Just to put you guys in the framework where we are, and I don't mean the framework of the narrative for today, I just mean more broadly. There are about 16 identifiable periods in Vincent's life, right? From when he leaves home. So I'll quickly go through them with you. Number 1, The Hague. 2, London. 3, Paris. 4, England. 5, Dordrecht. 6, Amsterdam. 7, Belgium, which includes Brussels, the Borinage, and then back to Brussels. 8, Etten. 9, The Hague. And that's where we are right now. We're at number 9. We've left Etten, now we're in The Hague. The Hague period lasts from 1881 to 1883. So although it seems like it was quite impulsive or quite random or quite rash that Vincent left home, you kind of got the feeling, well, he's going to have to go back a week later or a month later. Well, he ended up in The Hague for about 2 years. So he definitely wanted to leave, and, he was in his late 20s. So maybe it was a good thing for him to leave. That's followed by a period in Drenthe, which is just a short time. It's about 3 or 4 months. So that's not a very long period. And then there's the quite well-known period where he's back in Union. He goes back to his parents, right? And of course, that's a period also where his father dies in that 11th period. Then 12, Antwerp, that's back to Belgium. 13, Paris. And then the last 3 that we know quite well, all 14, 15, Saint-Remy, that's the asylum. And the 16th period is the last one in Auvers-sur-Oise, right? So 16 is Auvers-sur-Oise. We are now at number 9. So we kind of passed the halfway mark, certainly in terms of the periods. In terms of, how can I put it, other aspects, we've kind of got 4 years worth of letters, and then a break where he really doesn't write any letters, and then another 2 years. In 1884 and 1885, so right now we're at early 1882. In 1884 and 1885, the writing pace drops to sometimes no letters in a month. And, sorry, hang on, I've got that wrong. 1884, 1885, the writing pace drops, maybe 3 to 4 letters a month. In 1886 and 1887, there's almost no letters written. So 1888 is actually the craziest year. It's the year with the most letters. It's also a very colorful and dramatic year in Vincent's life. It's when he goes to All. And so I think that year in 1889 will be definitely very interesting. This story definitely ends with a bang, to maybe not the best expression, but the last 3 years are definitely very, very dramatic. But it's starting to build up. I don't know if you guys have noticed. So let me just put a link to that just so you can see the periods in chat. Nisi, have you injured your hand? Status quo, good to see you. So just to make today's challenge even more challenging for the members, I've opened today to regular subscribers, and so it should be a little bit more difficult to pick a winner, put it that way. Also, if you're watching this on replay, this is also open to you guys. If those in chat aren't on their toes, I'll go through the comments as well and see if we can find a winner. I still can't think of the word that I'm thinking for. I'm more. It's where you're more open to, or you're more biased towards something. But it starts with a P. Can't think of the word. I know what I want to say, I just don't have the word at hand. Yvonne says, thank you, wonderful that you're all here too. So the poll is, who was Van Gogh's girlfriend after Key Voss? And in that respect, I want to do something that I haven't done before as well, which is read an excerpt from this book, right? This book is Vincent van Gogh, A Life in Letters, right? And it's quite a thick book as well. Weirdly enough, this doesn't really deal with all of his letters. It deals with them mostly from 1881. So it's actually kicking off pretty much where we are now. So I'm going to take you to page 35 in this book. And it's really just bringing us up to speed with what we already know, but it's reviewed pretty well. So it says, quote, in the summer of 1881, remember our narrative, no, it's not prejudice. It's not prejudice. In the summer of 1881, Key Voss, the widowed, so bear in mind, today's letters kicks off in very early 1882, like January 3rd, I think. So just think about this. In the summer of 1881, Key Voss, the widowed daughter of Uncle Stricker, came to stay with a family. That's the Van Gogh family. Yeah, I think it's predilection. It's sort of like predilection. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, let's keep going. So Key Voss came to actually live with the Van Gogh family in the summer of 1881. And so you can imagine she's having meals there. She would be, getting up in the morning and having breakfast with them, having a bath, going for walks, going to church, cooking, cleaning, sleeping over, whatever, chatting, doing all the things that families do together. And in this sort of familiar scenario, in this casual scenario, where this woman is, and bear in mind she's a little bit older than he is, Vincent becomes infatuated, and then he falls in love with her. And he doesn't mention this in his letters to his brother. In fact, nobody seems to know about this. His parents, he seems to keep it a secret from his parents, and he only lets on that this has happened in November. So it happens in the summer of 1881. And so around about 4 or 5 months later, he eventually lets on what has kind of been happening. Then going to this book, he says, it says, quote, "She was adamant from the beginning that she could never return his feelings, yet Van Gogh persisted relentlessly in his pursuit of her, unshakable in his conviction that she could and would come to love him. He even made her a proposal of marriage." Did you guys know that? He even proposed. His reckless desire for her deeply embarrassed his parents, who considered him to be shaming the family. And his father warned Vincent that he risked breaking family ties with his indelicate and untimely behavior. And that is actually kind of what happened. In a way, Vincent broke his own ties with his family. Yeah, I think predisposed is the right word. I'm predisposed to quotes from Vincent's letters, but it's not. So Yvonne says, "I didn't know he proposed." So I mean, it was really a big, intense drama, right? As big and intense as family dramas go. Vincent grew even more hostile to his family's opinions. By the end of the year, which is kind of where we're now, the situation reached breaking point. At Christmas, this is in 1881, after an angry row during which he told his clergyman father he wanted nothing more to do with religion. You can imagine that's going to upset someone who's a pastor and his father. Vincent was asked to leave the house. Furious, he left that same day for the Hague. It also wasn't the first time he was asked to leave. Van Gogh then set himself up in a modest studio at Schenkweg 138 at the edge of the city. He was still suffering from the negative reactions to his love for Key, and still feeling a sense of abhorrence and disgust and negativity towards what he thought of as his family's short-sightedness, right? Although Theo accused Vincent of making his parents' lives miserable and nearly impossible, he continued to support him. That's actually quite amazing. Although Theo was kind of appalled at all this, he continued to support his brother. Now that's like unconditional love, right? If you think about it, Vincent van Gogh was kind of an asshole, right? You don't often hear people speaking about him that way, but he was kind of an asshole to his brother, to his family, kind of just doing what he wanted to do. And his brother supported him. And if you think about it, supported him even though he didn't have much to show for it his whole life. But the amazing thing is that his brother did kind of come good in the end, even if it was even after Theo's death. So there's something quite profound and moving about the story. It goes on to say, although Theo accused Vincent of making his parents' lives miserable, he supported him. Theo made a good living throughout Vincent's artistic career, gave some 15% of his income to his brother. It's quite a lot, but it's also not like it was to spend money too easily. It was a habit inseparable from his unrelenting passion for work. So although he kind of is always convincing his brother and his family that he's very frugal, he's a little bit of a spendthrift. And that is why when his father dies, he doesn't get the inheritance. He doesn't get his share of the inheritance because it was about to get worse. So he was always running out of drawing and painting materials. He needed models who had to be paid to pose, and he was determined to find adequate living and working quarters every time he moved house. So the next page, at the bottom of page 35, his early days in The Hague, that's where we are right now with the letter narrative, was at that time, The Hague was the cultural capital of the Netherlands. And it apparently started off quite well. His early days went well. He was getting advice from Tersteeg, who was his former boss at Goupil, and Mauve, who introduced him at the Painters Society, where he could find out about drawing models and meet other artists. And then now we're going kind of a little bit into the future of the letter narratives. Within just a few months, however, relations between Van Gogh and both these men began to sour as their disapproval of his lifestyle and attitudes mounted. This is why I say he's a bit of an arsehole, right? He's not really getting along with anybody. He's not getting along with, to some extent, his family. He's not getting along with other artists, and he's even not going to get along with the loves of his life, right? So it goes on here to say, they disapproved in particular of Van Gogh's relations with Sien Hoornik, a pregnant former prostitute who became his regular model. Sien's mother and daughter also posed for him regularly, and at first for a fee, and later when Sien and him became lovers, for free. So there's a little bit more to read here, but I'm going to leave that for a bit later in today's session. But it is sometimes just to get that sort of third-party perspective on where the narrative is going, right? Yvonne says it's like Vincent used up his inheritance early. Yeah. But the other side of it is you can kind of see how it's time that he starts living, right? He is 28 years old. He will be 29 years old later in this year, which is 1882. And so you can kind of imagine that as he's reaching the end of his 20s, he's thinking, wow, I'm almost 30. And obviously people married a lot younger in those days. You can kind of see him thinking, wow, I'm almost 30. I need to get going. I need to start doing. I need to start living. And part of that is leaving home, right? Bernie Young says she was a patient of Louis Pasteur. That's interesting. You mean Sien Hoornik? Okay, so if you guys want to follow, you can follow either from this link, which is the one I'm using, right? You can follow from that link, or you can follow on this link. It's the same thing, it's just two different sources. Gathering Place, good to see you. I hope you've had sweet dreams since we last spoke. Okay, so are you guys ready? There are a couple of nice sketches in this particular letter, but let's get started. And this letter is dated 12 to 16 January 1882. For those of you who are kind of interested in browsing around while I'm reading, you might want to have a look at these letters, which show the letter shows the actual original letter that Vincent wrote when he wrote on Theo's letter and responded, where he put numbers there. It's actually quite fascinating seeing the actual letter. So that's one link to that worth looking at. And then there are two others. Here's another one. Just worth looking at the actual original letter where Vincent writes on Theo's letter and then kind of responds to it. And then I'll share one more link with you guys. It's this one. Okay. Nisi says she's ready. Not there yet, says ready as ever. Robbie Robbins says, sorry I'm late. I had visitors. Robbie, actually just in time. Here we go. 12 to 16 January 1882. Dear brother, in my last letter I gave you, as I have before, a short and concise answer to some things. But for all that, you must not think that I'm always in a freezing, unfriendly mood, which Mauve would perhaps call a yellow soap or salt water mood. Well, and even if I had written a yellow soap or saltwater letter, that would not be worse than if I'd taken things too sentimentally. Just basically saying, I wasn't emotional. This isn't just a random drama. This is for real, right? Again, guys, pay attention to some of the statements he makes as a view to finding a good title for this episode. Anyway, he writes, you say you will deeply regret it someday. My dear boy, I think I've done much of that regretting before this. I saw it coming and tried to avoid it. Well, I did not succeed, and bygones are bygones. Shall I continue to have regrets? No, I really haven't time to regret. Drawing becomes more and more a passion with me, and it is a passion just like that of a sailor for the sea. Mauve has now shown me a new way to make something, that is, how to paint watercolors. Well, I'm quite absorbed in this now and sit daubing and washing it out again. In short, I am trying to find a way. And then he uses kind of a French expression which translates to, because one must make efforts like those of the lost souls, because there is something diabolical about executing a watercolor, because there is something good in every energetic motion. Although I intended to write you more explicitly about what happened at home and to try to explain things as they seem to me, although I wanted to speak to you about some other subjects too, I have no time for it now. So he's like saying, I'm moving on. And I think it better to write you about drawing again. I started at once a few smaller watercolors and also a large one, at least almost as large as one of those figure studies which I made at Eton. Now, of course, it doesn't all succeed right away. Mauve himself says that I shall spoil at least 10 drawings before I know how to handle the brush well. But behind it is a better future. So I work with as much composure as I can, and I'm not disheartened even by my mistakes. Well, that's also not big talk. You would go on to paint and draw hundreds of drawings literally without being able to sell it. And although I think there was a sense of disappointment, he somehow wasn't disheartened, right? Any of you guys know who wrote that genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration? Any of you guys know who said that? Because that's a really good description of Vincent van Gogh. From now until his death in 1890, he would be drawing and painting almost without interruption. In other words, lots and lots of perspiration. And that is what really was needed. Nisi says, a new distraction for Vincent, yeah. But basically what I'm trying to get at is, it's now early 1882. No, it wasn't Einstein. Terry Dean, you got it. Edison, who had to make about 1,000 iterations of the light bulb, playing trial and error with filaments and so on, said, genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. If you think about Van Gogh, he's going to spend really the next 8-9 years drawing every day, or not every day, most days, many days, without anything to show for it. And he doesn't give up. And after he dies, a long time after he dies, this incredible success flows, which shows that there is something to be said for all that perspiration, even if it doesn't come immediately. Then he says, this is a sketch of one of my smaller watercolors. It is a corner of my studio with a little girl grinding coffee. And this is a link to that. Actually, I think I put a link to that last week. I hope you guys are keeping cool. I see there's big heat waves all over the States. I saw something in the news about there being a record temperature last year. I think I'm not sure if it's in Oregon, of 116 degrees Fahrenheit. And now a year later, going up to 107, but very, very hot. I hope you guys in the Northern Hemisphere are keeping cool. You're welcome to send some of that heat this way. Nisi says it's raining and, okay, is that in Arizona? Terry says 101 degrees here. Okay. Okay, so let's continue. Vincent writes, quote, "You see, I am seeking for tone, a head or little hand, which has light and life in it, and which stands out against the drowsy dusk of the background, and then boldly against it all, that part of the chimney and stove, iron and stone and a wooden floor. If I could get the drawing as I wanted, I would make 3/4 of it in a yellow soap style, and would treat only the corner where the little girl sits tenderly, softly, and with sentiment." And one's actually kind of got to wonder, who is the little girl in this picture? And I've got an idea. It's Scene's daughter. Is actually already mentioned this encounter that he had in December. He doesn't say who it was with, but he seems to say it really soothed him and he enjoyed it. Well, one wonders whether that wasn't with Scene already in December. Is this her daughter, right? He goes on to say, "You understand that I cannot express everything as I feel it, but the problem is to attack the difficulties. The yellow soap part is not yet yellow soapy enough, and on the other hand, the tenderness is not tender enough. But at any rate, I've hammered the sketch onto the paper and the idea is expressed, and I think it is a good one. Of course, one cannot master the technique in a day." Then he says, "This is the subject of the large drawing, but I made it in a hurry and the sketch is horrible." So Cindy says it's been triple digits for too many days now. So the impression one actually gets of Van Gogh right now is that he's become quite social, that he was quite lonely and heartbroken and frustrated, and you kind of get the sense that he's now doing what he wants to do. He's kind of pushing forward and just being as obnoxious and inappropriate as he wants to be, because he's been kicking at the door for long enough, in his view. Okay, then he says, "They tell me somebody came to see me today. I think Mr. Tersteeg. I hope so, for he has promised to come, and I should like to talk to him about a few things. He said he would be back tomorrow morning. Theo, I have great trouble with models. I hunt for them, and when I find them, it is hard to get them to come to the studio. Often they do not come at all. For instance, this morning a blacksmith's boy could not come because his father wanted me to pay a guilder an hour. Of course, I refused to do it. Tomorrow that old woman will sit for me again, but she could not come for 3 days. When I go out, I often make sketches in the soup kitchens or in the third-class waiting room and such places. But outside it is so deuced cold, especially for me, as I do not draw as quickly as the more advanced and must finish my sketches in more detail if they are to be of any use. So you see that I do not sit idle, and for the present, I think no more about Eton, but try to get rooted here. Of course, the models cost a lot of money, and I must tell you that I also spend what is necessary for myself, though living as cheaply as possible. I take my meals in the soup kitchen, yet I hope you will not object to my going on." So he's insisting to his brother that he's being frugal, of course, he's going to need money for woman of the night kind of thing. And that's definitely not something that I think, an aspect that Theo is probably going to think is essential, but you never know. Maybe his brother does think, well, I'll throw in a little bit for that. You would imagine Theo would know his brother quite well by now, and also have a sense of intuition about the cost of art supplies, the cost of this and that, and where is a certain proportion going, right? No, it's not prejudice. I think it's the word I was looking for is predilection. I've got yeah. Okay, so, but I repeat what I already said in my last letter. Let me know as nearly as possible what I can expect. And I wish you could make some arrangement with Mr. Tersteeg so that in case of difficulties, I can go to him without any scruples. For my part, I promise you to work as hard as I can, but with models, for instance, whether I can work full speed, half speed, or not at all, often depends on the money I have or haven't got in my pocket. So he's kind of really emphasizing this aspect. That is saying, you know, if I've got more money, I can kind of I can paint it or draw a little bit slower. So now I'm making arrangements with a mother and her baby, but I'm afraid it will be too expensive. That, I think, is a reference to Sien Hoornik, because she is a mother with a baby, and also, I think it's a daughter. I think she's got a daughter as well. Then he says, of course you understand that I like best to go full speed, but, well, you know what I mean. I must hold myself in until I have a little more scope and freedom. So if you think about that, if Van Gogh wants to start to almost take in a lady of the night and kind of look after them, the person who's really looking after them is Theo, right? Which is a little bit like Vincent being a bit of an arsehole. He's really abusing the kindness and graciousness and charity of his family. Anyway, he says, write me soon and do send me the money for February as early as possible, for I'm quite sure I shall not have a cent left by that time. Meanwhile, I intend to go on making those little pen drawings, but in a style different from that of last summer's large one, somewhat more fiercely and savagely. This is a little sketch of the Schenkweg, the view from my window. And so this is a sketch of what he sees from his window. Okay, and that is the end of that letter. Yvonne said, who said, wow. Robbie says, wow, not many people will accept the request of letting their kids go to a studio these days. Not there, it says, questioning Vincent's judgment. Bernie Young says, I think he was, I'm not sure if I agree with that. Yvonne Phillips says the details of the sketch is good, but you can see his struggle with her face and hands. But he is definitely in a more social phase. He's drawing more people, and you can see he's definitely going in that direction. Susan says a part-time job would have went a long way. True. It's something they should have actually insisted on, right? Now we go into the next letter. So it's from the 16th of January. Now the next one is the 21st of January. So just a couple of days later. So if you want to follow on, it's at this link. And I'll just provide the sketch that he does. It's of a lady. One wonders whether that is seen. If not, who is it? But one does wonder, is that Sien Hoornik? Okay. Dear Theo, now that another week has passed, I'm writing you again. I've had a model regularly every day from morning until evening, and the model is good. I think that is seen. Mauve has been to see me, and Mr. Tersteeg also, and I'm very glad of it. I've been working all the time now in watercolor, and I'm getting to like it more and more. how I wish you were here. I have so many things to ask and tell you. Do you think you will come in the spring? Will you know sometime in advance? What I've done now is far from good, but it is different and has more power and freshness and is without body color. I must say, I wonder whether he really does want to see his brother at this point. I wonder whether he wants his brother to see what is going on. I think it's more almost like things are starting to happen in The Hague, and he sort of wants to know, what are your plans? It's sort of giving him a sense of what he can do and what he can get away with. Don't you get that idea? It's not that he really wants him to come there. He wants to know what his options are, kind of thing. Then he says, now I hope you will write me soon, and especially that we shall try to make some arrangement about the money. So it doesn't take very long to get to the point. He says, for though 100 francs a month would be sufficient for my own expenses, it is quite a different matter when I have to pay models daily. Well, it's also quite a different matter when you've got these models living with you and their children, right? That's actually what's actually taking place. He says, it is quite a different matter when I have to pay models daily and must feed them, and then the expenses of paint, paper, etc. I told you in my last letter that whether I can work at full speed or half speed depends on my income. Well, do you think him working at full speed or half speed is really relevant when he's got people living in his house and he's chosen to do that? He's sort of making arguments, but they're not completely, they're a little disingenuous, aren't they? Then he says, now that I'm settled here, small expenses spring up afresh every day. All of this is about money. He says, which do not make life easy for me at all. However, I've worked on regularly for some time, but now I'm without a cent. Well, it is only natural that when one settles somewhere, there are all kinds of expenses. Indeed, there are all kinds of expenses. But in spite of this, I am making progress, and I shall learn to make watercolors. And then it will not be so very long before my work becomes saleable. Actually, it will be very, very long. Mr. Tersteeg himself said something about it, and if some of those smaller ones turn out well, he will probably buy some. And I've completed still further the drawing of the little old woman, which I sent you a sketch of, and someday it will surely sell. Believe me, I work, I drudge, I grind all day long, and I do so with pleasure. So how's that for a title? How's that for a title? But I should get very discouraged if I could not go on working as hard or even harder. If you write to Mr. Tersteeg about it, he will certainly credit you for an amount which you yourself fix, and he can control its expenditure if he does not trust me. But it would be terrible if I couldn't go on working the way I have these last 3 weeks. Paddy says Theo was long-suffering. Yeah. Yvonne says he's complicating his financial situation for sure. Go Batman says the monastery would offer the peace Vincent sought. Well, I don't think he was seeking peace right at this point. He was seeking action, I think. Nisi says, I wonder if Theo could tell that by asking when he would come, gave it away that he was hiding things. I don't think so. I think at this point Theo was, remember Theo's got a job and he's got things going on, and he's just, I think it's becoming almost automatic. And it's probably going to become more and more automatic. Okay, needs money, let me send money. He goes on to say, it would be terrible if I couldn't go on working the way I have these last 3 weeks. Yeah, I'm sure he wants to continue working the way that he has the last 3 weeks. Then he says, as to the size of the drawings or the subjects, I will readily listen to Mr. Tersteeg's and Mauve's suggestions. I undertook some large ones recently because I wanted by all means to get rid of the dryness in last summer's studies. And now Mauve said to me last night, though of course he found some things to criticize, it is beginning to look like a watercolor. Well, if I gain that much, I suppose I've wasted neither time nor money. That's also a possible title. It is beginning to look like watercolor. What do you think? Nisi says, Vincent had the deception down then at this point, in my opinion. Okay, so he goes on to say, well, if I gain that much, I suppose I've wasted neither time nor money. And now that I've tried the use of the brush, and the strength of the colors on a large scale, I can again risk some smaller ones. For that matter, I started 2 small ones, but as I did not get on with them and partly washed them out again, I started a very large one, which I'm sending you a sketch of. Now he talks about money again. He says, so I've had enough work for the week that begins tomorrow, but I'm afraid I haven't enough money. For 2.50 guilders and a few cents is all I have left. What should I do now? If I go and ask Mauve or Mr. Tersteeg, I do not think either would refuse me, but Mauve has already done so much, and I would rather sell a few small drawings to Mr. Tersteeg than borrow money from him. It's not really going to happen. It's not like Tersteeg is going to buy anything. Anyway, he says, so answer me soon, and if possible, do something. Send me some money so that I can go on working. I feel, Theo, that there is a power in me, and I do what I can to bring it out and free it. All the worry and troubling over my drawing is hard enough. And if I had too many other cares, I could not pay the models. I should lose my head. It is bad enough that you have to pay for everything, but things are not so bad as they were last winter. I feel that I'm nearer success. I shall do what I can. I shall work hard. And as soon as I have more power over my brush, I shall work even harder than I do now. And if we push on energetically now, it will not be long before you need not send me money anymore. Well, boy, do what you can, and I shall also do what I can. Adieu. I count on your writing soon. You need not send so much at a time, if only I can go on from week to week. Receive a handshake in thought. So this is Vincent manipulating his brother, deceiving his brother. And I don't know if you're noticing, he doesn't really say that much about his drawing, and the letters are starting to get quite short because he's got other fish to fry. So this is another letter. It's written the next day, the 22nd of January, Sunday evening, Schenkweg 138 near Rain Station. Dear Theo, it is true I wrote you only yesterday, but I thought I would write you again. For though I still have a dose of courage left, it is sometimes very hard always to show good face to Mauve and Tersteeg and others. Yet I must. For though I do not pretend to be carefree, I need not tell them all the details and particulars. But it happens often enough that I'm quite at a loss as to what to do. Now this morning I felt so miserable that I went to bed. I had a headache and was feverish from worry because I dread this week so much and do not know how to get through it. And then I got up but went back to bed again. Now I feel a little better. But I wanted you to know that I did not exaggerate in yesterday's letter. If only I continue working hard, it will not be long before I earn something. So this is also all about money, right? This is all about money that is miserable, and he says, I'm not pretending to be carefree. Well, the reason he's miserable is he's kind of living a double life. He's trying to keep this private affair of his going. He's trying to literally keep up a family and have his brother pay for it without his brother knowing that that's going on. And the art is sort of the premise for all of this. Anyway, he goes on to say, he says, meanwhile, I'm greatly harassed by scarcity of funds. That's also, I think, quite a good title. What do you guys reckon? I think that's, I think that's also quite a good title. Okay. Yvonne says his art is his cover. Not there, it says a brother almost mediating for their father. Okay, so he then continues saying, besides, I still have relatively few drawing materials or else defective ones. He's trying to find reasons and excuses to petition his brother for extra money. Then he says, for the present, it is sufficient. I have my paint box and easel and brushes, but for instance, this week my drawing board warped like a barrel because it was too thin, and my easel also got damaged in delivery, which is bad enough. Do you think that's true? Do you think he's embellishing or exaggerating? Because this is quite new. You don't really hear him talking in this style. It seems a bit like a first. Nisi says deceptive, sneaky, smart. Okay, so next paragraph. Well, there are a lot of things which I still want to or have to improve. Of course, it needn't all be done at once, but daily it causes small expenses which added together worry me a great deal. Sometimes my clothes need repairing. Well, that's a new one. And we actually know that he didn't pay much of attention to his appearance. He also dressed in the style of the middle class, which didn't endear him to his own family, and also didn't endear him to his fellow artists. His fellow artists didn't like the way that he sort of dressed down, right? And here he is saying, my clothes need repairing. That's almost certainly not true. Then he says, and remember a letter not that long ago, he was saying, I need an extra suit, and what did he say? I'll keep it for years and years. Anyway, he says, you know, my clothes are chiefly old things of yours, which have been altered for me, or a few have been bought ready-made and are of poor material. So he's really digging into the bottom of the barrel for excuses here. He says, so they look shabby, and especially all my dabbling in paint makes keeping them decent even more difficult. It is the same with boots. My underwear is also beginning to fall apart. You know that I've been without means for a long time already, and then many things get dilapidated. So, you know, if you add together, my underwear is also beginning to fall apart with I'm greatly harassed by scarcity of funds. I think that's a great title if you put those two together. Do you guys agree? Do you think that's the winner? What do you guys think? Go Batman says his shoe rack had worn out shoes. Robbie Robin said he only bought 3 new pairs of underwear a short time ago. Robbie Robin, good memory there. Nisi says anything to keep up with the dollars for others and his side affairs. Yeah. So, you know, I think not that long ago, sort of in 1878, I suppose it is quite long ago, but 3-4 years ago, he seemed a sweet young man. He seemed this very idealistic, kind, sweet, earnest fellow. And now he seems not rotten, but he seems a little bit sleazy, doesn't he? Right? Then he says, and sometimes one involuntarily becomes terribly depressed. Now it's his state of mind. And you can actually imagine the Van Gogh Museum and art experts kind of going, you see, Van Gogh gets depressed. But do you think he's being sincere here? Do you think it's like real depression, or do you think he's sort of laying it on a bit thick here? I'm sure that he is feeling stressed and miserable and unsure, and he's trying to tap dance and juggle, but that's because he's taking chances and living by the seat of his pants, and his pants are on fire. Excuse the pun, right? Robbie Robbins says his underwear is newer than mine. I think mine too. PA Farmgirl says he's pulling on his brother's heartstrings. Yeah, so I'm just saying, if you took that line, sometimes one involuntarily feels terribly depressed. You might say, you see, Vincent was suffering from depression as early as 1882. Well, actually, it wasn't. This was a ploy, right? He's not really feeling depressed. He's actually enjoying himself. Then he goes on to say, if only for a moment, so I'm feeling terribly depressed, if only for a moment, only or often just when one is feeling cheerful, as I really am even now. That's what happened this morning. These are evil hours when one feels quite helpless and faint with overexertion. I think it was really because I had arranged with Mauve about what I would do with a model out of doors. And then all at once I thought, perhaps I cannot do it because in 2 days I shall not have a cent left, and then Mauve will think I was afraid. I just want to provide you guys with a mirror here. And the mirror is Kivos came to live with a family. He secretly fell in love with her, didn't tell anyone, and then that went horribly wrong, right? And now this is the aftermath. Now he's secretly having an affair with someone, and he's lying about it, because that is to him the lesson he learned from the Kivos thing, which is, I should never have told them. I should never have been open about it, right? I'm just saying this is a kind of a mirror from that particular experience. Then he goes on to say, I think it was really, he goes on to say, perhaps I cannot do it because in 2 days I shall not have a cent left, and then Mauve will think I was afraid. So I got up again to write you once more because I felt so anxious. So now he's writing to his brother every day, I need money, I need money, I need money, right? It's almost like Vincent's job, or not his job, the way that he earns money is by writing letters to his brother, right? It's like he paints and then he does other mischievous things, and as a way of earning an income, he writes to his brother, and he keeps writing letters to his brother. And it's something that he's sort of kept up. That's kind of maybe a reason why there are so many letters, hundreds and hundreds of letters. Anyway, he goes on to say, having to think about too many other things against my will hampers me so much in my work. Even when I am in front of my model, I do not know how I shall pay him or whether I shall be able to go on the next day or not. And I must be calm and quiet in order to work. It is difficult enough anyhow, and especially now I must keep up my spirits. But I felt so clearly this morning that my strength was failing me, not my ardor or my courage, and therefore I'm telling you once more. Now, it's quite hard to tell for sure, when he says, I felt so clearly this morning that my strength was failing me. Is that a lie, or is that the beginning of gonorrhea? Or is it both? The other thing that I think you can notice, but let me ask you guys this question. Do you notice that the tone of his writing is very different now to what it was a few months ago and even a month ago? Now that he's living with Scene, and I'm assuming he is, I don't know this for a fact, but it seems like he is, that the tone of his letters is quite different. He doesn't talk about seeing the sunset and seeing the light on a puddle of water kind of thing. Now it's quite practical. My underwear, this and that. He's not reading books either. Do you notice that? Anyway, he goes on to say, I can quite imagine that you also have your difficulties, but I think some arrangement might be made with Tersteeg, which would settle everything. Now that I can work at Poultry with a model 2 evenings a week, perhaps 4 days with the model would be enough if necessary. And now I have found that old woman, it needn't be so expensive as it was at first, when I had a new one every day. Again, I wonder whether that reference to the old woman is to Scene, who is quite a lot older than him. For I've already had several models, but they are either too expensive, or they think it's too far to come here, or they make objections afterward and do not come back. But I think I've hit on the right one in this old woman. That could also be a great title for this if you knew what it was referring to, right? I think I've hit on the right one in this old woman. Yesterday, I had a lesson from Mauve on drawing hands and faces so as to keep the color transparent. Mauve knows things so thoroughly, and when he tells you something, he exerts himself and doesn't just say it to hear himself talk. And I exert myself to listen carefully and to put it into practice. Yesterday, I told Mauve again that it was so necessary for me to earn something, but I will not ask him for money as he already gives me something that is much better than money. And besides, he has already helped me with my furniture, and that is more than enough. Now that I've written you, I will set to work again tomorrow, full of confidence. When you were in Eton last summer, you spoke about my working in watercolors. At that point, I didn't know how to start it. Now the light is beginning to dawn, and in spite of everything, the sun is rising. So that's also quite a cool title. Do you agree? Now the light is beginning to dawn, and in spite of everything, the sun is rising. Well, adieu, Theo. Receive a handshake in thought, and believe me, yours sincerely, Vincent. Okay, so that's the 22nd of January. Next letter, is 3 days later, 26th of January. Let's have a look at some of your comments. Okay, so let's keep going. Schenkvach 138, Thursday. This is the 26th of January, 1882, written from The Hague. Dear Theo, I received your letter with the enclosed 100 francs, and thank you very much for both. What I had already feared when I wrote you last has already happened, meaning that I have not been well, and I have been in bed for almost 3 days with fever and nervousness, now and then accompanied by headache and toothache. It is a miserable condition and is caused by overexertion. Mauve has again been to see me, and once more we agreed to keep up courage through all. If you want to follow this letter, then here's a link to it. But I'm so angry with myself now because I cannot do what I should like to do, and at such a moment one feels as if one were lying bound hand and foot at the bottom of a deep, dark well, utterly helpless. Now I have recovered enough so that I got up again last night and rummaged around, straightening things. When the model came of her own accord this morning, though I only half expected her, I put her into the right pose with Mo's help and tried to draw a little, but I could not do it. And I felt miserable and weak the whole evening. This seems to be the first time I remember him talking about his health. Am I wrong? It seems to be the first time in all of his letters that he talks about feeling really bad, where he says he's got headache and toothache and he's miserable and he can't sleep. I don't think he's ever written in this way. And he uses the word miserable quite often. And that's why I've so far until now said, does this guy strike you as the depressed, suicidal type? He goes through all these difficulties and he never writes about it. Well, he's writing about it now. Nisi says, or Yvonne says, now he does seem to be describing real symptoms. Nisi says, body can only handle so much exertion. Seems illness setting in. Go Batman says, it's the first time I've heard symptoms. Yeah. Susan says, sounds like a low-grade infection. It does. Okay, so he says, but I'm so angry with myself now because I cannot do what I should like to do. And at such a moment, one feels as if one were lying, bound hand and foot at the bottom of a deep, dark well. I've read that already. Then he says, but if I rest a few more days, it will be over and I need not be afraid of its coming back soon if I'm careful. Now, if you think about the timing of this, he starts, I think, regularly consorting with either Scene or someone who is in the same profession, but likely it is Scene. And then next thing is sick. Can you put the two together? There is, of course, the stress of what's happened at home, the stress of not having money is real, but it's something he's really brought upon himself, isn't it? Okay, he goes on to say, I'm very sorry to hear that you don't feel well either. When I was in Brussels last winter, I also took a bath at the bathing establishment as often as I could, 2 or 3 times a week, and it did me a lot of good. I will do it here too. No doubt, if you keep it up for some time, it will help you a great deal because it keeps the blood circulating well and the pores of the skin open. That way the skin can fulfill its function. Otherwise, it would shrivel up, especially in winter. Now, just that statement stands out so much from all of his other letters. Now, he's talking about the pores of his skin. And it must be, you can kind of think about Scene is sitting in his home, kind of doing her makeup or washing her face. And now he's like aware of faces need to be washed, right? Pores of skin need to be cleaned, right? All of this is coming into his head space and his heart space through other people, through his interactions with other people. Next paragraph, he says, and I tell you frankly that in my opinion, one must not hesitate to go for a prostitute occasionally if there is one you can trust and feel something for, as there really are many. So, I mean, that's quite a statement, eh? He's saying there really are many prostitutes. You really should go for one. So it's the sense you almost get is it's almost like Adam and Eve. And it's like he's trying to get his brother, is trying to give his brother the same forbidden fruit that he's been eating. Almost as a way to make his brother party to the same thing he's doing, right? So that's also quite a interesting title, or something along those lines. In my opinion, one must not hesitate to go for a prostitute occasionally. Anyway, goes on to say, for one who has a strenuous life, it is necessary, absolutely necessary, in order to keep sane and well. One must not exaggerate such things and fall into excesses, but nature's fixed laws, which it is fatal to struggle against. So what do you think he's talking about when he talks about nature has fixed laws? He's talking about his own libido, I guess. He says, well, you yourself know all you have to know on that subject. It would be well for you. It would be well for me. If we were married, but what can we do? Well, that's certainly the other side of the story, I suppose. He did propose to Kivos. I think he did actually propose to Sin as well. So anyway, he goes on to say, so he's kind of resigned himself now to kind of a different life. And he's sort of jumping in with both feet. Then he says, I'm sending you a little drawing, but you must not conclude that they are all like that. This has been washed in quickly and thinly, but this does not always succeed with the larger ones. Indeed, it seldom does. It will perhaps show you that it is not a hopeless business, that I have learned the knack of making them. He goes on to say, and we're almost at the end of this letter, the last time Merv was here, he asked me again if I needed money. I was then able to say I did not want it. But you see, in case of need, he would be willing to do something. And so though there will be some difficulties now and then, I hope we can manage to struggle through, especially if Mr. Tersteeg would be so kind as to give me some credit in case you're unable to send me money and when it is absolutely necessary. So I think pride is another aspect where Theo is giving his brother money so that he doesn't have to ask from other people, including people in the art establishment. I mean, think about it from Theo's perspective. Theo's works for Goupil, is in the art business, and Mauve is a well-known artist, and Tersteeg is a kind of a manager or franchisee at Goupil. And now his brother is asking them for money. So I think Theo would rather that doesn't happen. I mean, Theo also wants to hold on to his job. So he kind of wants to keep Vincent away from kind of, in other words, he wants to keep himself respectable by trying to keep his brother respectable, not knowing, of course, that his brother is moving far further and further away from being respectable. Although I think saying, in my opinion, one should not hesitate to go for a prostitute, I think there's a little bit of honesty coming through, right? Robbie Robbins says, like a drug wearing off. Not there yet says, when you constantly seek self-satisfaction, it leaves one empty in the long run. Yvonne says, sad that his virtue seems totally overtaken by these fixed laws. Yeah. I must say, it's quite, what's the word? It's quite kind of reassuring that he at least does say this to his brother. I think he realizes, I don't want to lie to Theo. So he doesn't keep up the ruse for very long, does he? Although he's still not been completely honest, right? He's starting to kind of go in that direction. Then he says, you speak of fair promises, and that's underlined. With me, it is more or less the same. Mauve says it'll be all right, but for all that, the watercolors I make are not quite saleable. Now I have some hope myself, and I will work hard on them, but it is often hopeless enough. For when I try to work them up, they become too heavy. It's exasperating, for it's no small difficulty. And experiments with watercolors are rather expensive. There's the money thing again. Paper, paint, brushes, model, and time, and whatnot. That's another thing that seems like a new word, and whatnot. Did he get that word from scene? That's something else that often happens is when you are intimate with someone, when you are in their space, you pick up some of their nuances, some of the expressions, some of their habits in a way. He goes on, and some of their thought patterns. He goes on to say, but even so, I think the most economical way is to keep going without losing time. For this bad time must be lived through. I must try to forget some things I taught myself and learn to look at things in quite a different way. It's also quite interesting that he's having a couple of epiphanies about his life, right? It takes a lot of effort before one has a steady eye for the proportion of things. It is not always easy for me to get on with Mauve or vice versa. So now there's a little bit of an acknowledgement that they aren't really getting on. And the reason is because of how Vincent is conducting himself. Mauve's also sort of taken on Vincent as a student, as a pupil. And Vincent sort of got his own ideas in terms of entertainment. Mauve's a respectable artist, and he's kind of like got this weirdo that he's working with. Then he goes on and he says, I think we are equally nervous, and it costs him a real effort to show me things, and no less for me to understand them and try to put them into practice. But I think we are both beginning to understand each other better, and the feeling is becoming somewhat deeper than superficial sympathy. He's very busy with his large picture, which was at one time intended for the salon. It is a splendid thing. I think the salon is like a studio or a place where you would exhibit. And he's also busy with a winter landscape and some fine drawings. I thought this letter was almost over, but it's quite a long letter. I think he gives each picture and each drawing some small part of his life. I think this should be at times. At times he's tired to death. And recently he said, I do not seem to get any stronger. And whoever had seen him at that moment would not soon forget the expression on his face. When my drawings become heavy, thick, muddy, black, and dull, Mauve comforts me by saying, if your work were transparent now, it would only possess a certain chic, and it would probably become heavy later on. Well, he had no way of knowing how heavy Van Gogh's art was going to get, that impasto. Now you're pegging away at it and it becomes heavy, but later it will go quickly and become light. I have no objections if this is true. And you can see it now from the little ones I'm sending. It was started and finished in a quarter of an hour, but only after I made a larger one, which had become too heavy. And just because I had worked so hard on that large one, when the model accidentally resumed the pose, I was able to sketch this little one on a bit of paper that was left from a sheet of Watman. This model is a beautiful girl. She's the model for arts and many others, but she wants 1.50 guilders a day, and that is too expensive for me now. So I try to manage with my little old woman. It's quite an interesting juxtaposition there. This model is a beautiful girl, but she's too expensive for me. So I try to manage with my little old woman. I think the success or failure of a drawing also depends greatly on the mood and the condition of the painter. Therefore, I try to do what I can to keep cheerful and clear-headed. But sometimes, like now, a heavy depression comes over me, and then it's hell. Again, you feel like, is this true, or what is really going on? Is he being a bit of a hypochondriac? He's saying he's suffering from heavy depression. Is he? Gathering Place says, I admire epiphanies. Yvonne says, I find it hard to understand that he couldn't sell any sketches. Surely someone could have offered a few coins here and there. I would have. Well, that's nice of you. I think how it is it's a combination in a way of three things. The art itself, so is the picture itself well rendered? And I remember at the end of last week's live, I put up a link to a sketch, and a lot of you said, wow, that's a beautiful picture. Well, it wasn't his. And everyone can recognize that's a well executed artwork, right? He's not there yet. So that's the one aspect. The other aspect is your reputation needs to precede you. Like often art sells by virtue of the name and the reputation, and he doesn't have either of those. And then the third aspect is often the artist has got to sell himself almost in person. He's got to be dressed a certain way. He's got to seem charming and some kind of breath of fresh air. And Vincent's the opposite of that. He seems like he's struggling and dirty and he's sort of rough around the edges. It doesn't seem like he is a visionary, right? And so in all three of those areas, he seems to be failing. Does that make sense? Not there, it says, I taught myself rather than adhering to sound advice. Nisi says, at this point, hard to know what is reality with Vincent. Is it real or just what he could gain? Yvonne says, I think he's feeling new feelings mentally and physically. Yeah, okay. But I mean, he's now talking about he's using the word depressed now almost every second or third paragraph. He's saying he's miserable every second or third paragraph. He's saying he's sick. And if you think about it, he went through the whole Borinage period with no complaints. He goes on to say, the only thing to do then is to go on with the work for Moven, Israel's, and so many others who are examples to the rest of us, know how to profit from every mood. It could be that, I know I'm like that, if I'm quite sick, where you are sick in bed, and I'm sure it's true of a lot of people, it's hard to be happy when you're ill, when you're really ill. It's hard to not be prickly. It's hard to be pleasant even, especially if there are other things going on, like you were about to travel somewhere or you were training and your training was going well and then all of that is lost. it can be quite depressing being sick, certainly when it interrupts the best laid plans. Then he says, well, I have some hope that as soon as I'm quite well again, things will go better than they are now. If I have to rest a while, I shall, but probably it will soon be over. In general, I do not feel so strong as a few years ago. Then I never had to stay in bed a day. So there is acknowledging that. But now there is always something the matter with me, although nothing serious. Well, my youth is gone, not my love of life or my energy, but I mean the time when one feels so light-hearted and carefree. I really say, so much the better. Now there are much better things after all. Keep heart, boy. I think it rather mean and cheap of Monsieurs Goupil and Key to refuse you when you wanted to draw some money. You certainly don't deserve such stinginess, for you have pulled many of their chestnuts out of the fire and do not spare yourself. So you deserve to be treated with some consideration. A handshake in thought. I hope soon to have better news to tell you than I have had lately, but you must forgive me, I feel rotten. Adieu, yours sincerely, Vincent. Quite a poignant letter, that, isn't it? Okay, so we go from January 26 to more than 2 weeks later, almost 3 weeks later. From The Hague, 13th February, the day before Valentine's Day. Not sure if they celebrated it then, in 1882. Robbie Robbins says, a constant worry about money is draining. It is. Nisi says, chronic anything will test the strongest of wills. Gathering Place says, I watched the Netflix about him and his soup can. Gathering Place says, it's fascinating to me how art is valued and what is universally liked. A lot of art is public relations. A lot of art is public perception. I mean, in my life, and in your life, how many artworks have you actually bought? Not that long ago, probably maybe within the last year, I bought a beautiful picture of I think it's a bee eater at a stall in Plettenberg, but it cost quite a bit. It's one of the few artworks I've ever bought, and it was from an artist I didn't know. And it just shows you, some people maybe spend quite a lot on art, but so I might show you guys that maybe a bit later. Okay, so let's go on to this letter, 13th February 1882. Remember, he only spends 2 years in The Hague. We're now into the second month of that period. Okay, so here we go. Dear Theo, this morning when I wrote to you, I was still in doubt about something that worried me exceedingly. By the way, bear in mind, about 4 months from now, he's going to end up in the hospital. So whatever sickness he has here is just going to get worse, presumably. Anyway, he goes on to say, I'm now reassured for a time. I must tell you some bad news, which is that Mauve is far from well. Of course, the usual thing. So Mauve is also sick. But also some good news. I have the assurance that it is only due to his illness that he has treated me so unkindly of late, and that it was not because he thought my work was going wrong. I've already told you in a previous letter that I had a visit from Wissenbrugg. At present, Wissenbrugg, or I think it's actually Weissenbrugg. Weissenbrugg is the only one allowed to see Mauve, and I thought I would go and have a talk with him. So today I went to his studio, the attic which you know too. As soon as he saw me, he began to laugh and said, I am sure you have come to talk about Mauve. He knew at once why I came, and I did not have to explain. Then he told me that the reason for his visiting me was really that Mauve, who was doubtful about me, had sent Weissenbruch to get his opinion about my work. And Weissenbruch then told Mauve, he draws confoundedly well. I could work from his studies myself. It's quite a compliment, isn't it? So this other artist says to Mauve, who seems to be a bit doubtful, this guy is good. This guy is really good. And he added, they call me the merciless sword, and I am. I would not have said that to Mauve if I'd found no good in your studies. So here he's kind of found a neutral dude who is actually definitely on his side, right? He says, now as long as Mauve is ill or too busy with his large picture, I may go to Weissenbruch if I want to find out anything. And Weissenbruch told me that I need not worry about the change in Mauve's attitude toward me. Now, one wonders what lies behind that change in his attitude. Is it just his illness, or is it Vincent's lifestyle? Then I asked Weissenbruch what he thought of my pen drawings. These are the best, he said. I told him that Tersteeg had scolded me about them. Pay no attention to it, he said. When Mauve said you were a born painter, Tersteeg said, no, and I will take your part too, now that I've seen your work. I do not care so much about taking my part, but I must say that sometimes I cannot bear Tersteeg saying to me over and over again, you must begin to think about earning your own living. So he's getting this reproach, this reprimand, repeatedly from his former boss, and he doesn't like it. But I think there's never a truer word spoken in, well, I don't know if it's jest in this case. Nisi says, a mentor that enjoyed Vincent, that must have felt good while it lasted, for sure. Then he says, I think it is such a dreadful expression. Wow, think about that. I think about that. You must begin to think about earning your own living. I think it is such a dreadful expression. No doubt, Vincent, no doubt. No doubt. That would also make quite an interesting title. You know, we talk in true crime about holding yourself accountable. And here he expects others to pay his way, and is like quite, you know, obviously it was difficult for him, but the other side of it is, as somebody said, you could do a job on the side. Anyway, then he says, and then it is all I can do to keep calm. I work as hard as I can, and I do not spare myself. So I deserve my bread, and they ought not to reproach me with having been able to sell anything up to now. So he is being criticized. He is being criticized that he hasn't sold anything. And this is like year 1 of 9 kind of thing. He says, I tell you these details because I do not understand why you have neither written nor sent me anything this month. So he's now quite upset with his brother. So for 3 weeks he hasn't heard from his brother, and he's now writing these compliments. And you know what I mean? Then he says, is it possible that you have heard something from Tersteeg that has influenced you? So now he's getting quite paranoid. I can assure you once more that I work hard to make progress on things which would be easy to sell, that is watercolors, but I cannot succeed immediately. If I succeed in making them by and by, it would still be rapid progress, considering the short time I've been working, but I cannot succeed right away. As soon as Mauve is better and comes to see me again, or I go to see him, he will give me some useful hints on the studies I'm making meanwhile. Lately, Mauve has done very little for me, and once he himself said, I'm not always in the mood to show you things. Sometimes I'm too tired, and then you will damn well have to wait for the right moment. I think it is a great privilege to visit such clever people as Weissenbruch occasionally, especially when they take the trouble, as Weissenbruch did this morning, for instance, to show me a drawing they are working on, but which is not yet completed. I think maybe one's got to take what he says, Weissenbruch said about him, with a pinch of salt. I don't like to say it because I like to believe that Van Gogh is sincere and truthful, but in a situation where he's kind of not being very honest, he's not playing completely open cards, and also he's desperate, you sort of feel like, is he possibly manipulating? Is he possibly lying, right? Anyway, he goes on to say, because I don't know, when I look at Van Gogh's art at this point, I don't think he's quite arrived yet. So for another artist to say, wow, it's awesome, but it's just, in a way, a little bit of a pity that you're now at this point where, can you trust what he's saying? Because he is actually, to some extent, being dishonest with his own family, or not completely honest. And bear in mind, he's also kind of turned his back on God, so you kind of get the feeling that he's now a law unto himself, right? Ricardo says, I don't think he's lying. He might want to write what Theo wants to hear. Maybe. I'm just saying it's something to consider. Not there, it says, I do believe some think themselves above the working people, then end up with little to show for their lack of effort. Tommy Coyote says Warhol and Basquiat were weirdos from the darker, weirder side of art, for sure. Tommy says some people have a difficult time with structure, can't handle a job. Nisi says desperation could be lessening his integrity. Could be. So he goes on to say, this is just what I want. Whenever you have an opportunity to see anyone paint or draw, watch carefully, for I think many an art dealer would judge many pictures differently if he knew how they were made. It is true one can understand it somehow by instinct, but this much I know. I got a clearer insight into many things by having seen artists at work and by trying some things myself. I should like to have some more of that ingress paper someday. Perhaps the weather will soon be good enough to work outdoors, and then it will be of great use to me. I'm getting more sparing with my studies and should like to get back those you have. Adieu, dear fellow, a handshake in thought. Poor Mauve, he will not get better until his large picture is finished, and after that he will be exhausted. Ever yours, Vincent. So now we go from the 13th February to another letter, same day. Dear Theo, though I have been expecting a letter from you every day, I'm writing you once more. I heard some news of you from Mr. Tersteeg when he came back from Paris. He told me that you were all right and he seemed quite satisfied with his trip. When I went to see him, I took a few drawings with me and he said they were better than the others and told me to make some more small ones. I'm busy with them now. I also made a new pen drawing of an old woman's knitting. Who do you think that is? And I think this one is better than last summer's. At least it has more tone. When I have finished a few pen drawings, which are well done, I think I know a purchaser for them. A few days ago, I also wrote CM to tell him that I have taken a studio here and that I hoped he would let me know whenever he came to The Hague and that he would come to see me. Last summer, Uncle Cent also told me that whenever I'd finished a drawing somewhat smaller than those I was doing and more watercolors, I must send them to him and he would buy them. Perhaps the time is really not far off when I shall earn some money with my work. I need to very much for no other reason than to go on working seriously. You must tell me if you can find out what kind of drawings the magazines would take. I think they could use pen drawings of types from the people, and I should like so much to make something that is fit for reproduction. I do not think that all the drawings are made directly on the blocks. There must be some means of getting a facsimile on the block, but I do not know exactly what process is used. Sometimes I long so much to see you and have a talk with you. Will it be long before you can come to Holland? I think that father rather expected you on his birthday. I was very glad that Mr. Tersteeg thought the drawing somewhat better. Well, I'm getting more used to my model, and for that very reason I must continue with her. In the last two studies I grasped the character much better, I'll bet. Everyone who saw them told me so. At present, I sometimes go out drawing with Breitner, a young painter who is acquainted with Rocherson, the same way I am with Mauve. He draws very well and in quite a different style from mine, and we often make sketches together in the soup kitchen or in the waiting room. Now and then he comes to my studio to see wood engravings, and I go to see him too. He has the studio that Apel used to have at Siebenhaars. Last week I went to a small art show at Pultkree, where I saw sketches by Bosboom and Henkes. Very fine. Henkes has much larger figures than one usually sees from him. He ought to do more of them, I think. Weissenbruch has also been to see me. Every day I look for a letter from you, for I hope that you will send some money soon. Well, that's telling it like it is, isn't it? Every day I look for a letter from you, for I hope that you will send some money soon. We must keep on and persevere, brother, you as well as I, and someday we shall reap the fruit of it. I'm so glad I've worked on the figure up to now. If I had only landscapes, yes, then I should probably do something that would sell at a small price now. But then later I would be stranded. The figure takes more time and is more complicated, but I think that in the long run it is more worthwhile. De Bock came to see me this afternoon just as I was working with my model. When he saw her, he said he would also like to draw from the figure, but for all that he doesn't do it. But he made a very beautiful drawing recently. Now we're almost at the end of this letter. He said, in your last letter, you told me something about the question of your not being able to draw an advance before the inventory was made. So it seems like Theo's actually, at this point, struggling financially, and it's almost like he's got to draw money, he's got to loan money in order to give money to Vincent. That seems to be the situation. Vincent says, but if you cannot get the money, then be so kind as to write at once to Mr. Tersteeg about it. For I have only about 3 guilders left, and it is nearly the middle of February already. At all events, I expect a letter from you one of these days. I think that in my last drawings, the proportions are much better than before, which has been the worst fault in my drawings up to now. Thank God it is changing, and then I shall not fear anything. Adieu, Theo, write soon, handshake in thought. Okay. So 2 letters on the 13th of February. Now we go to the 18th of February, 5 days later. Wow, he's really getting antsy. Dear Theo, it is now the February 18 and I've not heard anything from you this month. I thought you might perhaps be ill because in your last letter you mentioned not feeling well. But Mr. Tersteeg told me that you were better. At least he was not aware of your being ill. As you can imagine, I'm very hard pressed for money. Mr. Tersteeg bought a small drawing from me for 10 guilders. Oh, so that's a little bit of a sale that we otherwise didn't really know about. Obviously, it's not a painting, but that is something. So Mr. Tersteeg bought us, he maybe did it out of sympathy. Then he says, with which I managed this week. But he wants them small and only in watercolor, and I do not always succeed in that. But at least the first sheep has crossed the bridge. I work as much as I can. So that would also be not a bad title. Mr. Tersteeg bought a drawing from me for 10 guilders. The first sheep has crossed the bridge, right? He goes on to say, I work as much as I can, but I don't forget that I shall break down if I have too many cares and anxieties. So I write by return mail, send me some money if you can, and believe me, with a handshake, yours, Vincent. Then he adds the following postscript. This week I made 3 other studies beside the one Mr. Tersteeg bought. The technique is not perfect yet, but thank God the drawing is better. I don't know, there's also just a niggly sense, is it true that Mr. Tersteeg bought this picture. Mr. Tersteeg doesn't seem to really like him, so would he have bought it? Is that true? There's just a bit of a niggle there. I mean, he's desperate to get money from his brothers. He's just saying whatever he can say. Then he says, I'm very glad that I feel my drawing is improving. It gives me courage. Drawing is the principal thing, whatever they may say, and it is the most difficult too. It is for this reason that I venture to say I shall make something saleable within a year. For the one Mr. Tersteeg bought does not count. I shall make them much better when I have made more progress in drawing, as then it will come more easily to me, right? Okay, so he finally receives money from Vincent near the end of February, which I guess is like his payday, and includes the following drawing, which I think is pretty good. This is definitely not bad. But you would imagine after all the drawing that he would start drawing properly. That definitely isn't a bad execution. So he writes in his letter dated 25 February, Dear Theo, I received your last letter with the 100 francs enclosed in good order, and thank you very warmly for sending it. I should have acknowledged it at once, but I was very busy with a few drawings for which I had a model. So he gets money, and then instead of saying thank you, he kind of does other things for a while. For you should bear in mind that if you are busy, it is the same with me, and will be increasingly so because my work is becoming more and more absorbing to me. And it is only with effort that I tear myself away from it to write a letter or call on someone when necessary. I was very glad that you wrote that you would soon come to Holland. After you have seen what I've been doing lately, we shall perhaps get a clearer understanding of the future, indeed. When you come, I hope we shall spend quiet time in the studio, and I also hope you will let me know beforehand so that I can arrange things with my model. Of course, he needs to know beforehand so that he can get them out in time, and not have her during the days of your visit. Sneaky, isn't it? Bear in mind he's got Scene and them living with him, so if his brother comes to visit, that's going to be something he needs to keep under wraps. You write about Father's birthday. I must tell you that I'm so glad to be free of it all. It gives me such a feeling of tranquility, something I need so much for my work. My head cannot hold more than it does, and I dread beginning a new correspondence, so much that for the present I'm leaving things as they are. When I think of Eton, it gives me the shudders, as if I were in church. That's his feeling now of the church. By the way, you must not take it amiss, Theo, or think I'm finding fault with you, but you wrote me something which you thought would perhaps please me, but it didn't please me at all. You said that small watercolor was the best of mine that you had seen. Well, it isn't, because those studies of mine which you have are much better, and last summer's pen drawings are better too. That little drawing is of no importance whatever. I only sent it to show you that it is not impossible that I may work in watercolor sometime. He doesn't really distinguish himself as a watercolor artist, though, ultimately, does he? Yvonne Phillips says, definitely a double life scene there. Yeah. This is where you apply a little bit of true crime to the story, right? But there's much more serious study and more character in those other things, though they may look rather yellow soapy. And if I had anything against Mr. Tersteeg, but in brackets I have nothing against him, it would be the same thing, which is that he encourages me not in the difficult study from the model, but rather in a style of work which really is only half fit to render what I want to express, according to my own character and my own temperament. Of course, I should be very happy to sell a drawing, but I'm happier still when a real artist like Weissenbruch says about an unsaleable study or drawing, that is true to nature. I could work from it myself. Although money is of great value to me, especially now, the principal thing is for me to make something serious. Well, the same thing that Weissenbruch said about a landscape, a peat bog, Mauve said about the figure. An old peasant who sits brooding by the hearth, as if he saw things from the past rising in the glow of the fire or in the smoke. It may take a longer or shorter time, but the surest way is to penetrate deep into nature. One may be in pecuniary difficulties for some time, but one gets over that, and then the drawings that were refused at first are sold. I think pecuniary difficulties is another way of saying financial difficulties, or so that is what it means. Interesting. Okay, so he goes on to say, I've written CM to tell him that I've taken a studio here and he will be coming to The Hague soon. Next paragraph, well, I hope you will succeed in getting a vacation, for I long very much to see you. I think when you have seen these last week's studies, you will quite approve of my having models regularly. Of course, I can draw the models better when I've come to know them well. And I've had rather good luck in finding them. Today, while I'm writing you, I have a child who has to rest for half an hour, and I'm using the half hour for this letter. I wonder if that child is Scene's child. P.S. I've made 2 more studies of the child today. It is getting dark now. Good night. Okay, so that's that letter. So now we go from the 25th of February to the 3rd of March. I want to provide some of the sketches that he does. Put that in chat. This one looks like an old lady with a walking stick. Not particularly good, I don't think. And then there's this one, also old woman with a walking stick. Not a terribly impressive image. Gathering Place says, yeah, no, I agree with you. Robbie Robin, Charles Dickens used to use the word pecuniary. That's interesting. Robbie, that is pretty astute of you. Well done. Gathering Place says the pandemic took a very vulnerable population and pushed it to the edge of a cliff. Nisi says, what a wonderful group you have assembled here, Nick. Thanks. And thank you guys. Ricardo says, have we outgrown Plato's cave? Better to get out of that cave first before looking for a new one. Ricardo Ortiz, thanks a lot. I like your little, looks like a fox, pretty cool. Tommy, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. He painted before, during, and after when he was in the asylum. I think he's already started painting at this point. Actually, I can show you some of the first paintings that he did. These are some of the early portraits that he did. Obviously, these are painted, but I think the first paintings are, I think they're here. So these are some of the very early pictures. And these are the very, very first paintings that he did. Cabbage with clogs, and I think it's beer mug with fruit or something. So just for FYI. Go Batman, thanks a lot for that. Go Batman's been a member for 4 months. Cool. Gathering Place says, have you read Apollo Arrow? No. But maybe some others of you have. Okay, so 3rd of March, my dear Theo, since I received your letter and the money, I've had a model every day and am now up to my ears in work. I have a new model now, and though I've done a hasty drawing of her once before, or rather, there is more than one model, for I've already had 3 individuals from the same family. A woman of about 45, who is just like a figure by Ed Freire, and her daughter, about 30, and a younger child of 10 or 12. They are poor people, and I must say splendidly willing. This is quite a unusual description of these people, their ages and so on. Again, I'm not 100% sure if this is a reference to Scene, but I think it sort of fits the... Actually, I don't think it is her, because Scene was pregnant. Would she have been pregnant at 45? I suppose it's possible. It's hard to say. Anyway, it says, I only managed to get them to agree to pose with some difficulty and on condition that I promised them regular work. Well, that was exactly what I wanted so badly myself, so I consider the deal a good one. The younger woman's face isn't beautiful because she has had smallpox, but the figure is very graceful and I find it rather charming. They have the right clothes too, black merino, and a nice style in bonnets and a beautiful shawl, etc. You needn't worry too much about the money because I reached an agreement with them at the beginning. I promised that I would give them a guilder a day as soon as I sold something, and that I shall make up then for paying too little now. But I simply must sell something. If I could afford to, I would keep everything that I am doing now for myself, since if I could just keep it for a year, I feel sure I would get more for it. But anyway, in the circumstances, I should find it very gratifying if Mr. Tersteeg did take something now and then, if necessary, on condition that it will be exchanged if it isn't sold. Mr. Tersteeg has promised to come round to see me as soon as he can find the time. The reason I should like to keep them is simply this. When I draw individual figures, it is always with a view to a composition with more figures. For instance, third-class waiting room, or a pawn shop, that's PAWN, or an interior. But the larger compositions must mature gradually, and for a drawing with, let's say, 3 seamstresses, one might have to draw 90 seamstresses. Voila, there you have it. I've had a kind note from CM with a promise that he will be coming to The Hague soon and visit me then. Well, it's just another promise, but perhaps something will come of it. We'll see. For the rest, I'm going to run after people less and less, dealers or painters. It doesn't matter who they are. The only people I shall run after will be models. Since I'm sure that working without a model is quite wrong, at least for me. Quite an interesting image there, I must say. Quite an interesting image. The only people I shall run after will be models. Okay. Status Quo says something about architecture degree. Tommy says, I thought mostly after the asylum. His paintings are very nice. Yeah, well, he painted in... All those paintings are pretty awesome. He also painted in Paris. And then we obviously got to go through the Noonan period as well. Yvonne says, sometimes it's hard for an artist to let go of his work for less than he thinks it's worth. Status Quo says, I also sacrificed my wants to simply be known as an artist, but I knew there were patrons for those. Well, you do have Patreon these days for artists. I wonder how Van Gogh would have done on there. Anyway, it goes on to say, it's gratifying, isn't it, Theo, when there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm seeing a little bit of light now. It's gratifying to draw a human being, something alive. It may be damn difficult, but it's wonderful anyway. So here he's obviously enjoying the social experience of drawing a person and getting to know them. I think I'm going to stop at about 2 hours. I'm just finding my voice is struggling. Anyway, he says, tomorrow I shall be giving a children's party, 2 children whom I have to entertain and draw at the same time. I wanted, wow, it's quite mind-blowing that this idea of Vincent going to a children's party. Anyway, then he says, I want there to be some life in my studio and already have all sorts of acquaintances in the neighborhood. On Sunday, I'm having a boy from the orphanage, a real type, but unfortunately, I can only get him for a short time. It may be true that I don't have the knack of getting on with people who are sticklers for etiquette, but on the other hand, perhaps I get on better with poor or common folk, and what I lose on the one hand, I gain on the other. I think that's a very true statement from him. Shall I read it again? He says, it may be true that I don't have the knack of getting on with people who are sticklers for etiquette, but on the other hand, perhaps I get on better with poor or common folk, and what I lose on the one hand, I gain on the other. Sometimes I just leave it at that and think, after all, it's right and proper that I should live like an artist in the surroundings I'm sensitive to and am trying to express. Here we are at the beginning of another month, and although it's not yet a month since you sent me something, I would ask you to be so kind to send me some more soon if you can. It doesn't have to be 100 francs all at once, but just a little to be going on with between now and when you can send the rest. I mentioned this because you said in a previous letter that you wouldn't be able to raise any money until after stock taking. So he's saying, you can't send me a lot, well then send me a little. He says, it grieves me sometimes when I realize I'm going to have to keep a model waiting because they need it so badly. So far, I've been paying them, but next week I shan't be able to. But I'll be able to get a model anyway, either the old woman or the younger one or the child. Now, if you think about it, I don't know if he's really paying them. It's more like he's looking after them. That's really where that money is going. Incidentally, Breitner mentioned you to me the other day, saying there was something he was very sorry for, in which he thought you might still be cross about. Apparently, he still has a drawing that belongs to you, but I didn't understand exactly what it was all about. He's at work on a large affair, a market that will be full of figures. Last night, I went out with him to look for different types of figures on the street so as to do a study of them later with a model in the studio. I've drawn an old woman in this way whom I saw on the Geest, where the madhouse is. Well, bonsoir, I hope to hear from you soon. Ever yours, Vincent. Postscript. I had to pay the rent too this week. Good night. It's 2:00 already and I haven't finished yet. So from the 3rd of March, 1882, we go to the 9th of March. Quite a few letters in March and April. So I've gone a little bit forward in time, but I just want to show you what looks like, I'm not sure if it's a watercolor or a sketch. I think it's a sketch. Have a look at the sketch that he does a couple of months later. But I don't think I'm going to take it further than that. I'm feeling a little bit like my voice is a bit tired. I thought I would get at least to sort of April, but there are quite a few letters in January, February, March, April. How long is this letter? Okay, maybe I'll do one more letter. How's that? So letter from Vincent to Theo, 529 March, 1882. Dear Theo, in your letter of February 18, you said, when Tersteeg was here, we of course spoke about you, and he told me that whenever you wanted anything, you could always go to him. Then why is it that when I asked Tersteeg some days ago for 10 guilders, he gave them to me, but accompanied by so many reproaches, I might almost say insults, that I could hardly control myself, though I did. So he actually finally asks Tersteeg for money, and Tersteeg then and him have almost like an argument. Remember, Tersteeg's his former boss at Goupil. Then he says, I would have thrown the 10 guilders in his face if the money had been for myself, but I had to pay the model, a poor sick woman whom I cannot keep waiting. So I think that is true, is that he wanted to throw the money back in his face, but he needed to have it for other purposes. So I kept quiet, but for 6 months I will not go to Tersteeg again or speak to him or show him any of my work. I'm not going to say that to him, but I'm saying it to you. Dear Theo, you may say, you must remain on good terms with Tersteeg. He's almost like an elder brother to us. But my dear fellow, he may be kind to you, but for years he has only shown his unfriendly and harsh side to me. He would have the right to reproach me if I did not work, but it is unjust to someone who toils patiently hard and continuously on difficult work to make reproaches like this. And then he provides them, like in quotes. He says, of one thing I am sure, you are no artist. That's a potential title. Vincent's former boss at Goupil. Isn't that ironic? Vincent's former boss at Goupil. Do you think that wins the award for the most ironic title? What do you guys think? Is that the best title? I'm just emailing it to myself that I remember it. Some of the title possibilities are, believe me, I work, I drudge, I grind all day long, and I do so with pleasure. Another one is, I'm greatly harassed by scarcity of funds. That just seems normal, although if you add my underwear is also beginning to fall apart, that's quite interesting. Then he says, you must begin to think about earning your own living. I think it is such a dreadful expression. Is that maybe the best one? And then, of one thing I am sure, you are no artist. Well, if you think about that in hindsight, it's, with the benefit of hindsight, it's quite weird. Ricardo says, episode title for me is Vincent, A Man's Room is His Castle. Status Quo says, great insight into Van Gogh's mindset. Thanks, Nick. Okay, so let's go on. He also says that another insult from Tersteeg is, one objection which is great weight with me is that you started too late. That's somewhat true. I mean, he starts in his late 20s. Then another one, you must earn your own living. I think that is something that he did need to hear. I mean, how on earth can you not say that to somebody? How can you not say that to someone? I mean, everyone has to make their own living. And then he says, stop, watch what you say. One cannot always be friends, one must quarrel sometimes. As to the arrangement between you and me about receiving money from you, when you come to The Hague, which I hope you will soon, I want to speak about that with you in Mauve's presence and with nobody else. Mauve's large picture will soon be finished, and then I suppose Mauve will give me some hints about watercolors again. The substance of what Mauve has said up to now is, Vincent, when you draw, you are a painter. And therefore I've worked and worked hard on drawing, on proportion, on perspective for weeks and weeks. Tersteeg doesn't fully appreciate this and only talks about things that don't sell. Nisi says, thank you, as always, Nick, and to this fabulous group. Such wonderful lessons and therapy as well. So happy we're not finished yet. Thank you, Vincent, for so many letters. Love to Timmy. Thanks a lot, Nisi. Then it's almost the end of this letter. He says, I do not deserve his reproaches, meaning Tersteeg's, but I will be calm because I certainly do respect him. Therefore, I say, after 6 months, we shall speak to each other again. For 6 months, we shall not see each other. That's him and Tersteeg. If you can, send me the money for this month soon. I'm making progress with my work, but I cannot work without money or with too little. With a handshake, yours sincerely, Vincent. Then he adds this short postscript. He says, I would rather go without dinner for 6 months and save in that way than occasionally receive 10 guilders from Tersteeg accompanied by his reproaches. I should like to know what painters would say to his argument, work less from the model because it is cheaper, when after a long search one has found models who are not too expensive. Working without a model is the ruin of a painter of the figure. Okay. So our next letter will be this one. We'll do it on Wednesday, and I'm going to try a different format in Wednesday's episode. I'm going to try and make use of a share screen thing. I'm just not 100% sure if you're using StreamYard, whether it's kind of got to be done off the computer and off a camera that's linked to the computer, or whether you can do share screen if you're on your phone. I'm just really not sure how the technology works. In fact, I was astonished when I did a live with a guest from Austin, Texas, and my battery ran out on my phone, and then the live went on. I thought that my StreamYard is the platform. So I was quite astonished that it could sort of carry on regardless. So anyway, we're going to try that in live stream number 19, and hopefully, then the reason I'm doing it with the Van Gogh is there's a smaller audience and it's a little bit of an easier format. So, but hopefully we can, I can kind of show you some of the artworks in a more fluid fashion. I mean, I want to do it. I'm just not 100% sure if it's going to work, but we'll practice. If it doesn't work the way that I want it to work, we'll try another way. So before I go, a few things I want to do. I want to show you these sketches from Vincent. It's not too bad. This is from the next letter. It's titled City Street. And then here's another one, also titled City Street, which is so-so. I think I prefer the first one. And then here's another one, Beached Boats with Horses. And of course, this is not by Vincent van Gogh. This is by Anton Mauve. So this is this particular image is from the artist that is giving Vincent, art lessons, who's sort of taken Vincent on as a sort of a pupil. And you can see it's pretty damn good. It's definitely very, very good. Nisi says, I always lose you all on my phone when I open links. That's why I want to try and do it using this share screen thing. Nisi says, seeing the artwork will be wonderful. Well, I'm going to try. We'll see how it goes. In terms of the poll, who is Van Gogh's girlfriend after Kivos? The answer is Sien Hoornik. Good to see that most of you got that right. The next door neighbor was someone who came out, I think, when he lived in Newnan, So we're not quite there yet. Agostina Segatori was when he lived in Paris, and that was after he was in Newnan. So the order in which he has these girlfriends, Caroline Hanebeek was his first. I don't know if she liked him, but he liked her. So his first love. Then there was Eugenie. Then there was Kivos. Then Sien Hurnik. Then the next door neighbor. And then Agostina Segatori. She was a cafe owner in Paris. So good to see most of you guys got that right. Interesting that a third of you thought the next door neighbor. Are there any more sketches here? No. Okay, this is quite a long letter. I think it's quite a good place to end off. So we'll resume on the 11th of March, 1882. Some of these, like 1882, 1883, might take quite a while to get through, but other years will be a lot quicker to get through. So although some of it feels slow, there will be other years that we'll race through, such as 1885 and 1886 and 1887. They'll go by very, very quickly. 1888 will take ages to get through, but that will be a really interesting year. So when he goes to All, and he has all sorts of adventures with Gorgar and other people. So I'm going to end off by just reading you from this book from Vincent van Gogh, A Life in Letters. And I've just highlighted a section here that I just want to share with you guys. It's dealing with this period. It's from page 36 and 37, dealing with beginning as an artist. So it reads as follows. Vincent made contact with other artists in The Hague, among them George Breitner, and produced many drawings as well as 2 series of cityscapes for his uncle Cor. His favorite subjects were workers and impoverished people. He hoped that his art would reach ordinary folk. He wanted to make figures from the people for the people. Still thinking of becoming an illustrator, so there was a point where he thought he would work for magazines. He collected hundreds of illustrated magazines. So in this way, Van Gogh was a sort of commercial artist, like he was trying to make art for the masses in a way. And so he collected magazines. The prints of these magazines moved him with their realism, immediacy, and unpolished technique. Also bear in mind that in these magazines were also photos. Photography was coming into its own at this time. So you would start finding photos in newspapers, photos in magazines. And now the question was, where does the art fit into all of this? And the answer was the art needs to go beyond photography. It needs to express something, hence Van Gogh's expressionism. So the next paragraph here reads, Vincent exchanged prints with Van Rappard, and their letters contained long discussions about artistic and technical questions. And then this is going a little bit in the future. In June, this is June of 1882, right now we're in March, so around about 3 months from now, Vincent van Gogh spent several weeks in hospital, right? Not just a day or a week, several weeks in hospital being treated for venereal disease. During this time, a reconciliation came about between him and his parents. So when he's sick in hospital, his parents come to see him and sort of feel bad for him. Learning of Vincent's condition, his father traveled to The Hague to visit him. On leaving hospital, Vincent moved to a better and more spacious studio further down the street. So they see him in hospital, they feel sorry for him, and they upgrade his entire living scenario. And what does he do with that? 2 weeks later, he was joined by Sien, her 5-year-old daughter Maria, and her newborn son Willem. When he broke this news to Theo, so saying, by the way, I've just moved in a prostitute, her daughter and her son, basically a baby. When he told Theo about this, Vincent tried to deflect criticism by citing Michelet's books, by saying, but this book says you must do this for the poor. Then he says he would defend his relationship with Scene repeatedly and vehemently in the face of strong condemnation, especially from Tersteeg and the conservative Van Gogh family. Vincent's letters reveal his version of reality. A man is duty-bound to help a fallen woman, and it stands to reason that this will cost money. It also says here he dressed like a member of the working class, to the dismay of Theo and the rest of his family. Then the last paragraph here, once Vincent was established in his new studio, he settled into a rare period of relative calm that enabled him to focus more intently on his art. And then the final paragraph here, I'm not really going to read it all, but it talks about in August 1883, Vincent made plans to leave the Hague for the rural province of Drenthe. But so he will eventually leave the Hague, which is quite a cultural capital of the Netherlands, and is now going to go back into the countryside. And he goes there. That's almost like a precursor to him going to Aal. The whole idea is get out of the city and go and see the landscape, see the lie of the land under the sun kind of thing, and the wash of the seasons. And he would do the same a couple of years later when he left Paris. He would leave Paris to go and see the French countryside. And that, of course, became art history. That whole, I mean, some of Van Gogh's best art is what he painted in the south of France, at the asylum, in Aal, and then also Auvers-sur-Oise, right? Okay, and that is it. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. Thanks a lot for your contributions. Thanks a lot for your comments. Thanks a lot for voting in the poll. Sage's quote says, nothing changes humans like trauma. So, guys, what are we going to go for in terms of the title? Marcel van Skyk says, thank you, Nick. Sleep well. You too. Robbie Robbins says, loved it. Nisi says, okay, what do you guys think of in terms of the title? I quite like, I'm greatly harassed by scarcity of funds. My underwear is also beginning to fall apart. So I'm gonna put up three options. Tell me which one you like the most. I'm greatly harassed by scarcity of funds. My underwear is also beginning to fall apart. That's number one. Number two, you must begin to think about earning your own living. I think it is, and then I think it is such a dreadful expression. That's two. And number three, of one thing I am sure, you are no artist. Vincent's former boss at Goupil. That's number three. Shall I read them again? So just vote in chat what you think is the best title for this episode. I am greatly harassed by scarcity of funds. My underwear is also beginning to fall apart. That's number one. Number two, you must begin to think about earning your own living. I think it is such a dreadful expression. Number three, of one thing I'm sure, you are no artist. Vincent's former boss at Goupil. That's obviously from Tersteeg. So Yvonne says number three. Robbie Robbins says the underwear one, number one. Paddy says number two. Status Quo says earning a living. Well, you guys are very different in your votes there. Very different in your votes. Becky Hill says three. Sharon Martin says three. Number three is, of one thing I'm sure, you are no artist. Number one is about the underwear. Number two is you must start thinking about earning your own living. Gathering place is number one. PW says make an executive decision. Not there yet says number 2. Sharon Martin says number 3. Gathering place is number 1. Nisi says number 3 cuts deep. Okay, well, I think we're going to go for number 3. I think it does cut deep. I think the fact that Van Gogh got really upset about it maybe is a good one. It does come up here. I was also told the same thing by my boss. I was told, you aren't a writer and you cannot write. And I was told that on my first day at work. And I went on to write 101 books, and I was published in hundreds of magazines and so on. And I don't know whether she still has a job, to be honest. But anyway, that was something that my boss did, and she did everything she could to stop me from writing, which is quite weird. And they also said you may not write for this company. So, like, you're not a journalist, you cannot write. You may not write for us. So then I'd write for like a different newspaper. And then they said, no, you can't write for someone else either. So it's like, you can't write, but then it's like, oh, but I did write for someone else. No, but you can't write for them either. Why not? Well, because we own the copyright of everything. Like, we own you. So it's like, so I can't write, but then I do write for someone else, but I can't do that. So I may not write for someone else or you, right? It's just really ridiculous. Anyway, Louise says, good to see you, Louise. Thank God you didn't let us stop you. Some people are very strange. I remember, just because I sat sort of behind her, I remember watching her write, and she'd like write 3 or 4 words and then backspace, and then write another word and then backspace. And she would take like an hour to write something like that long, and to still be absolutely average. Like, she couldn't like seem to make up her mind what she wanted to say. And she was telling me I can't write. It's okay to say, I don't like your writing, or I don't like your style, or I don't, but like, to literally put yourself as an obstacle and say, you won't write and I will do everything to stop you. There seems something sadistic in that. And nasty kind of thing. I also thought it was very strange that she had a husband who was sort of not deformed. He was sort of disabled. He walked with like a limp, and he was sort of like this. And he was a sports writer. And I just thought, it's not right that somebody, this is just my personal opinion, it's not right that somebody who cannot do sport, that has no experience of sport, writes about like Olympic athletes and so on. Just like, I think someone who has some experience of sport is a better sports writer. I'm not saying that as an absolute fact, but just I think you can write a lot more insightfully if you know about sport than if you, for example, someone who's disabled. And yeah, so anyway. Anyway, Nisi, unhappy humans spreading joy. Tommy says, great story, Nick. Maybe she was jealous. I think she was just a controlling person. She loved saying no. So if you had an idea, no. She was kind of one of those power figures, like getting getting a kick out of being the boss and telling people no, and snuffing out their hopes and dreams, kind of thing. It did drive me crazy, that's for sure. But it got me where I needed to go. Yvonne says, you figured your way around that. I definitely did. Libuku, good to see you here, says 1. Corporal Deb says, is your book Treachery still available? It is. Do you need a link for that? We quickly well, no, I actually don't. I think if you just Google my name and Amazon and Treachery, you ought to find it. Shouldn't be a problem. Okay, so that is it. Let's just see who's here. Okay, shall I do that? Okay, so there are 2 books in the Treachery series. Do you want it in paperback or on Kindle? This is the Kindle link. And yeah, so hopefully that's fine. Let me just post it here. Okay, there you go. Kindle, good, I guessed right. Roseanne says, I thought my parents were going to throw up. Not there, it says multitasking is always an option. Okay, so again, all you guys who are in, especially in the USA, good luck with the heat that is taking place there. It's especially hot, I see, in, I think, Louisiana and Oregon and California. So if you're in any of those places, take care. Look out for episode 19 on Wednesday, where I'm going to try a different format. I'm going to be experimenting. To be honest, I don't really like the way the quality of the broadcast seems to suffer a little bit. But we're just going to try something new. If it works, great. If not, well, we try it. So we'll see how that goes. So be ready for a slightly different approach. And there might be some little niggles, but it might also be the beginning of a sort of a more fluid and interactive thing. So I do think when you talk about art and artists, you really do want to show some of the art. And those of you who are on your phones, you don't really want to go off. So that's the way to do it. So we're going to try doing that. Tommy says, this was an enjoyable live. Thanks, Tommy. Robbie says, when I was 9, I told my teacher I wanted to be a teacher when I grew up. She was a miserable woman. She said, you're going to have to learn to spell first. Yeah, that is a miserable response. Did you become a teacher in the end, Robbie? I actually met a bartender or spoke to a bartender on Friday who was left school last year, who seemed, she wanted to become a teacher, quite a pretty girl. Sunflowers, hello, everyone coming in late. Yes, it's been very hot in California. True Jedi Forever says, what time Wednesday? It'll be half an hour later than today. So I guess that's 4:30 Eastern time. Corporal Deb says, all good. I'll be here Wednesday. Cool. Okay, guys, thanks very much. Take care. Keep cool and see you guys next time. Ciao.